You right?
There was Marc Feld and there was Marc Bolan. It was like Clark Kent and Superman.
His egoism was off the charts.
I mean, the Beatles were one thing, like the Rolling Stones were another, we are something else.
He was the best lover.
People always ask if Marc was bisexual.
It was just him.
The rock and roll cocktail entered his life, which was champagne, cognac, and cocaine.
I don't think I lived that long.
I was so young when it happened.
40 years, and his legacy still lives on.
There's no one like him.
Write it on out like a bird in the sky. Waves, write it on out like you were a bird. Fly it on out like an eagle in a sunbeam. Write it on out.
Shame it's so windy, it's cooling it down a bit.
Marc and I were totally different. I always describe us as chalk and cheese. He was always going to be famous, and there was no pushing him back. The earliest thing I can remember is the lady in the bottom flat looked after me when my mum went into labour, and she woke me up and said, "You've got a little brother."
Oh, you're a strong one.
Marc and I had a lovely mum and dad, and they brought us up as best they could. The house we grew up in was on Stoke Newington Common in London. It was a 3-storey house, and we were on the top floor. My mum worked on a stall in Berwick Street, and my dad was a lorry driver. Money was tight, but whatever we wanted, we got it. My mum and dad bought him an acoustic guitar off of the back page of the Sunday Pictorial, and that was £11, that was. He was 9. He'd go and watch the likes of Tommy Steele, Marty Wilde, Wee Willie Harris, and pick up all little bits and pieces of information and store it away. My mum and dad were very quiet. They didn't have any outstanding personalities. Marc's personality come out of his head. Marc never had any doubt that he was going to be a star. Marc wanted fame.
Well, you can bump and grind if it's good for your mind. Well, you can twist and shout.
Marc was my cousin. We were like brother and sister. Marc's named after his uncle, Marc Feld, who was a chef in the army. This Irish chap found out Marc's dad was Jewish, and when my uncle was asleep in bed, he came in and smashed him on the head, and he died. And that's how Marc got his name, Marc Feld. Marc had a load of Jewish friends in school, and he just went with them. His mother wasn't Jewish, but his dad was, and he just loved the Jewish way of life and the warmth and everything. Marc was very ambitious, but to me, he was a very, very sweet boy.
I shouldn't have gone away, so I'm coming back today. You're walking back to happiness.
1961, Walking Back to Happiness went to #1. I was 14. But school days are a very special time in a person's life, and I have very fond memories of Marc. In those days, Marc's claim to fame was this kind of Elvis quiff. He was very much a character. We went to the same school, Northwold Road School. I remember we were put in a group together, and Marc turned up, but he was 9, we were 10, And we had to think about it for a while, but then we let him join. And we took to him straight away, and we had this group, Susie and the Hula Hoops. When we used to walk along the street, we all wanted to take turns holding this guitar, because it was so cool to be seen holding a guitar in those days, because they were few and far between in Clapton, in the borough of Hackney, where we came from.
Walking back to happiness again.
Thinking back to it, how many kids were part of a little pop group at the age of 10 and 9? It was fun. It was a lovely time. And we would sing Elvis Presley songs. Well, we would perpetrate Elvis Presley songs.
Well, there's 1 for the money, 2 for the show, 3 to get ready. Now go, 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 but don't you step on my blue suede shoe. Well, you can do anything but take me over my blue suede shoe. Well, you can knock me down. Yeah, just coming up to the corner now. This is the old rehearsal space for Susie and the Hula Hoops. If we stand over here and look directly across the road, we can see Marc's old house, second house in. And the top floor was where he had his bedroom he shared with his brother Harry. My greatest memory is Marc sitting on that wall playing his guitar. God. It seemed in those days always the sun was shining and we were trying to be the Everly Brothers. Neither of us were ever into sport. I don't think either of us ever played football. We talked about nothing but music. I think we learnt to play guitar from Burt Whedon's guitar book. I think everybody learnt from that. Marc's my oldest, dearest friend. I loved him then. I love him now.
Bye-bye, love. Bye-bye, happiness. Hello, loneliness.
In the summer, we'd get the 73 bus and go and see Marc's mum, who worked on the fruit stall in the Berwick Street Market. And one particular day we went there, and Marc's mum said, she said, the manageress of the Two Eyes Coffee Bar in Old Compton Street, which was the rock and roll venue in London at that time, buys her fruit from me. She said, and I told her about you two. And she said, go down there and you can sing. I'm guessing it was Bye Bye Love. We couldn't have played it that well, so God knows how we had some guts. Because there were like real musicians in there. Wow, that's 60 years ago.
Oh yeah, we're the London boys. Oh yeah, we're the London boys. Oh yeah, we're the London boys. Oh yeah, we're the London boys.
God, waited all that. I've been here for like, I'm drunk.
Been on a bus.
Did you take any light bulbs out of the bus and smash them like you used to?
No, that was your game. You and Marc.
Oh yeah, we're the London boys.
I remember Marc, it just come to memory. This was his fashion, his thing. He was destined to get on and be somebody. And,
Absolutely.
You know,
he could have been a film star or a rock star. It was just a matter of time.
Look at this gaff now, look. Who would have believed it?
But who taught he knew how to put clothes together? I mean, where did he learn that?
If you can recall Beau Brummel with his cravats and his, you know, he was a dandy. And that was what Marc was. Well, the first time I met Marc, I was on Stamford Hill. And I remember Marc, he wanted to become part of what we were. I was 16 years old then. And then I bought that grey GS, you know, and that's when Marc became very attached to me. I'd be wearing a big parka, you know, with a big hood, scarf, warm gloves. Marc will be sitting on the back of my scooter wearing a three-piece suit. And he'd have an umbrella with him as well. Whether he became attached to me as a friend because I had the scooter or whether he liked me or what, I don't know.
He loved you.
But I know he loved me.
It helped that you drove.
It really did.
But he loved you.
But he never spoke about the real stuff that made him who he is.
Yeah, but nobody would know that. Only the people who were around at that time.
Girls liked him. He was a handsome little boy. Janice, that girl Janice. Did she really know him? Did she just know him,
I'll tell you one
kiss and cuddle, or did she know him?
I'll tell you one great thing about Marc. Even as a young man, he never
divulged the truth.
He never talked. Where most of us had our first sex experience and told the world, he never did.
Whatever happened to the teenage dream?
Teenage love is really important because you never forget it. Brings back so many memories. Marc would have loved this. This is just like the amusement arcade that Marc and I used to go to in Stamford Hill. We were all mods, and Marc came up to us and he actually spoke to me. He wooed me by his looks. He was very flamboyant. He was real dapper. I was 14 and Marc was 12 and a half, which sounds really young, but Marc was very mature for his age. When he was with his friends, he showed off more. With me, he was quieter. We used to come up here every day.
Putting money in the slot machine.
In the slot machines. If you're stipping something, you're stipping someone.
That's right.
Yeah.
You're pushing.
Yeah, pushing.
Yeah, this is pushing, correct.
Yeah, yeah. When I used to go to Marc's house, Marc always took me up to his bedroom, where we used to sit on the bed and Marc would strum away at his guitar. And he always said to me, one day he would be famous. He wasn't really romantic because he was so young at the time. But he did tell me he loved me, even though he was that young. I feel really, really lucky to have dated Marc because he was really a talented young man.
The first person that really turned me on was Bob Dylan. I put the words that I felt very deeply inside me. He was successful at that, and I figured I might be.
I knew him as Marc Feld's. I don't know how he came up with Toby Tyler.
Get a lot of traffic now. There wasn't traffic in the 60s. The Savoy Grill was very famous for taking dinners and parties and wonderful times there.
The moment I agreed to be his manager, I first of all had to find somebody who could record him. So I rang up Lionel Bart, who's one of our greatest composers. And Lionel said, oh, go down to Denmark Street, mate. There's a few places down there that make records.
Well, here we are. It's still here after all these years. Ah. Wow, this is extraordinary. It is so different to what it was like then. You wouldn't believe this was just, well, there's nothing really, anything here. The door led to a door, and then up this end, you sort of came, well, there certainly wasn't all this glamorous guitar and rock and roll stuff. It was just basic equipment for recording, and there was usually a couple of session musicians. But on this occasion, there was nobody, because Marc had his acoustic guitar, so there was the sound man and the engineer, and that was it. And he sat here strumming, blowing in the wind, his pop idol Bob Dylan's hit song.
I'm not sure Marc had a sense of entitlement, but I must say that if an ego gets you somewhere, Marc gets 10 out of 10. He had no delusions about himself. He was in love with himself. But he needed to be, because he was breaking into a world where he had been left behind very quickly. There were other people coming in every 10 seconds. It's a bit like Hollywood in the 60s, where people were getting off buses and trains to be stars. People were coming into London using Liverpool accents to get themselves recorded by someone. I was a junior presenter on this show called the 5 O'Clock Club. Even though I was about 15, I was living in Lexham Gardens. It was a penthouse with fitted carpets and central heating, which was unusual for the time. I didn't realise that people who came to stay with you should be paying you rent. So because everything was free, everybody came to stay. And there were several people coming out of cupboards at one point. If they could find somewhere to sleep, they would sleep there. And that's how Marc came into my life. He came round for a few drinks, stayed over. He would sit cross-legged on the floor like a Boy Scout with a guitar, strumming it, but with the curtains closed 24 hours a day, because he had lily-white skin that he was very proud of and had no intention of the sunlight reaching him. But I can say, because I knew him rather well, he wasn't a vampire. My mother was in the flat while Marc was there, and it was her that discovered us in bed together and made the remark, "Oh, I suppose it's 2 teas this morning," with a rather sarcastic attitude. And then when I went into the other room and I said, "Look, there's nothing going on here, but, you know, I've decided I might be queer," because I was happy to be queer, I was never gay. Mother said, "Well, I've had 13 kids, one of them's got to be." And that was the end of our sexual discussion. People always ask if Marc was bisexual. I think, first of all, you've got to understand that in the early 60s, in fact, during the whole of the 60s, into the 70s, it was practically compulsory to be bisexual. There were orgies practically every weekend, and you didn't mind what or who the limb belonged to, what sex didn't come into it. Also, there was a thing that if you weren't bisexual, at least a little bisexual, you weren't very trendy. He had great personality, but I'd seen him in the bath, so it wasn't my type. But I loved him. He was sweet and he was fun. And he did have a sense of humour, even against himself. Being Marc's so-called first manager, I realised there were 2 things we had to do. 1, to make a record so people could hear him, and 2, to get some photographs taken so people could see him. So I introduced him to a character called Mike McGrath. When we arrived, Mike McGrath was in a rather short silk dressing gown, which exposed some rather white, knobbly knees, a white, hairy chest. Upon greeting us, he said, "Honey, what a rare treat."
I look best from below. I was a fashion photographer, making the most of the menswear boom in Carnaby Street. Anybody who was in the pop world, I was having to search for clothes for them to wear. It was an interesting period because so many new people were coming my way, most of whom I liked. The unknown Marc Bolan was brought to me by his manager at the time, saying, "I'm promoting him. He's a folk singer called Toby Tyler. Can you make him look good for me?" I did shots that never appeared in print. How old would he have been then? 17, 18? The world was full of these pleasant boys who wanted to be pop stars. When you meet somebody when they're too young, there are all kinds of disadvantages, which it was true of David Bowie and Marc Bolan. When they were first sent to me, they had almost nothing to say. To me, he was an unknown attempt at a folk singer. So it was totally different to the Marc Bolan the public know.
They want to pigeonhole you into something that is not necessarily what you do. I'm sort of a cross between a lot of people.
This is Marc's masterpiece for John's children.
Desdemona, just because you're the daughter of a man, he may be rich, he's in a ditch, he does not understand just how to move old rock and roll to the conventions of the young.
It was his version of Jailhouse Rock. He loved the beginning of that. Unfortunately, there was a line in it that says, "Lift up your skirt and fly" at the end, which, for some reason or other, the BBC thought was absolutely terrible, so we got it banned. We'd already had our first album banned, which was called Orgasm. Before Marc Bolan arrived, life for John's children was very strange indeed. Simon Napier Bell was our manager from 1966. Simon, at that time, was already managing a young folk singer by the name of Marc Bolan and said he wants to try him in our band. He'd originally had a guitarist by the name of Jeff McClelland, a rather tall guy, but Simon wanted another person the same size. We were all sort of like 5'6" or something. When he first came down, we had no idea what he was going to be like. This new, young, slightly mad folk singer who had never played electric guitar before. So I sat down for the afternoon with Marc, and he went through some of the records that he liked, which was Blonde on Blonde he was playing, and then he sat down cross-legged on his sofa and played me some of these weird songs. You know, there was one called Hippie Gumbo, which I thought, oh my God, this is not going to work in our band. But he had a kind of strange boogie-ish sound, that bopping sort of sound, a sort of bluesy sound. We handed him an electric guitar, you know, he just played one chord and then he fell over, because we've got a wall of amplifiers. They're actually designed by NASA, so they throw the sound out. He was obsessed with the huge new noise that he could make. He spent about another half an hour just playing this loud electric guitar before we nearly sort of went up and punched him and said, "Shut up." Simon had said, "I want you to dress all in white because you look very angelic." And then we go completely mental. I was always diving off stage and fighting with John. Marc never come across anything like us before. He was very shy, but it didn't take too long before he became completely mental like the rest of us. One of the first gigs that we ever did, he drank 2 bottles of red wine before we went on stage and just collapsed halfway through, and he was in tears on the way home. He would have been 19 years old. We'd been touring for a couple of months with Marc, doing gigs in England beforehand, and then this whole German tour with The Who.
I'm losing my mind. Help me now.
Didn't start off very well. As soon as we arrived in Nuremberg and they saw our wall of sound and the double Slingerland drum kit that was bigger than Keith Moon's, Pete Townsend and Roger Daltrey, they absolutely hated us. But the gigs were getting more and more fantastic. The creme de la creme was the final night in, well, it's not the final night for The Who, but it was for us, was in Ludwigshafen, when we created, you know, such a riot that night. The riot police came in with water cannons, firing them through the windows, and we had to escape quickly out into the car park and jump into Simon Napier Bell's Bentley and roar off down the Autobahn and virtually out of Germany then, because we were deported.
I consider myself a craftsman at what I do, be it writing songs. I'm not any different from when I was about 9 years old.
Right now there's a group called Tyrannosaurus Rex. Marc Bolan is well, there are only 2 in the group, and Marc Bolan is the singer, and he was with John's Children, who released a number of records and have some records on release right now. Marc decided to go out and form his own little group, just the 2 of them, and he sings very gentle, soft little songs, and one of them's playing right now in the background, and it's very beautiful.
I walked down the stairs of Middle-earth and I heard this beautiful music coming up through the stairwell. And when I entered the room, I saw about 150 people sitting cross-legged very quietly on the floor, listening to this duo on the stage. It reminded me of folky kind of music, but it wasn't quite folky. It was kind of psychedelic. I went up to Marc and I said, "My name is Tony Visconti. I'm a record producer, and I really like you, and I'd love to produce you." He goes, "Well, I'll tell you the truth. You're the 7th record producer who came in this week to look at us and ask us the same thing. In fact, John Lennon was here last night, and he wanted to sign us to his new label called Grapefruit." A lot of what Marc said in those early days, and even in later days, was never the truth, but he was desperate to become a star. Marc was sparkling. He was bursting with energy. He was beautiful, and he was articulate, and his writing was excellent. His poetry imagery was excellent. It was surreal. The first thing we recorded was Deborah. We did the same thing for a couple of years with Tyrannosaurus Rex. I think the early hits that we had made the top 30. I think we actually tickled number 20 with Salamander Palagander. He met June in '69 and totally fell in love with her. And she was really a very, very smart woman. And Marc always gravitated to very powerful women with respect. With real respect. He wasn't a chauvinist by any means. He was very respectful of June.
And then he said, I've got something to give you. And out of his trousers pocket, he brought a little piece of paper, and I opened it, and it was the most beautiful love poem. And I looked at him, and he said, I'm in love with you. And I said, oh, well, all right. And I was absolutely speechless. But I knew that it was right.
Marc and June got married early '70s. It wasn't long before David Bowie got married. They found a flat in Notting Hill Gate, and it was a one-room attic loft. It was really a disgusting flat, no bathtub. So once a week, Marc and June would come around with their towels and scrub brush and put on some music, and they'd have a bath.
I mean, there are very few people in life that can decide that they want to be famous and actually make it happen. And Marc did that.
Marc and David Bowie used to come to my flat in Earl's Court. Even though David was a solo acoustic act and Marc was a duo acoustic act, we're playing electric music in my flat. We're putting on Beach Boys albums, Rolling Stones records, and we're jamming along with them. That started something new. What I realized was that Marc was always trying to make a pop record with Tyrannosaurus Rex, with just a guitar and clay bongo drums. So one thing we did differently with Ride a White Swan was I said, let me write some strings for that, because I hear it nice and smooth over the top. You know, you're chopping away and Mickey Finn is hitting the tambourine. I said, this is the smooth thing. He said, okay, go ahead. It was around the time I kept abbreviating Tyrannosaurus Rex on my calendar, just write T-Rex in a line through the week, you know, as one would want to do. He said, the name is Tyrannosaurus Rex, man. I said, I know what the name is. I said, does it matter to you that I put it on my calendar? Just shortly after that, he said, I'm changing the name to T-Rex. I went, fine, that's great. That changed everything. And with that, our first single under T-Rex went up to #2 in the charts. It was a massive hit. And we went down to a vegetarian restaurant called Crank's, and we celebrated. This is our victory lunch. And we emptied our pockets. We put all our change on the counter. We didn't even have a pound note between us. Marc bought these things called nut rissoles. That was his favorite thing. And we walked back triumphant to Trident Studios and recorded the rest of the day, knowing that our lives had changed forever. Next single was Hot Love. Went to #1 almost instantly. It was the bounciest, happiest song you can think of. Next, the T-Rex band went to America to tour. After about 3 weeks, I get a long-distance telephone call from my boss back in London saying, you better record more singles. This song is still #1. So I followed Marc around from New York to LA. We went to 2 different studios and recorded Jeepster.
You're so sweet.
I introduced him to all my friends in New York City, and one night I introduced him to Barbara Nessum, very, very famous artist. I said, okay, I'm gonna go now. Maybe we should give Barbara a break, you know. So the band got up, I got up, and Marc stayed.
Just like a call, you're pleasing to behold.
When everybody left, he asked if he could look at the work and talk to me about it, because he felt a connection to it. And I said yes. And so our communication was on the creation of our work. It comes from the universe, and he felt the same way. I graduated in 1960. Still, women went to school, they got out of school, they got married. They had kids, they moved to the suburbs, but it wasn't me. And I thought, well, I'm gonna work and do my own work So when I met Mark, wasn't like he was going to want to get married or he was going to want to have a relationship. And he was English. He didn't live here. He went all over the world. Perfect. It wasn't his clothes that attracted me. And it wasn't even his looks. It was just him, the way he was. He was just calm and peaceful and nice and warm. He was like 7 years younger, but he didn't feel young. He was an old soul, not a young person. The fact that he was married didn't mean anything to me because real life didn't have anything to do with how we felt about each other. It was kind of went over all of that. Because when you connect on a spiritual level, it transcends all of this other stuff. Our relationship, because it was long distance, he wrote me letters, and I still have the letters. I loved his handwriting. It was very angular. They're personal letters. They were romantic. Because we had such a connection to each other, it sort of made an impression upon me and probably upon him as well. We were in different stages of our lives when we met, and I think those different stages affected our relationship going forward. I found that little spot that we connected to, and then he moved on, I moved on, and
we were in the charts for a good, solid 3 years, never out of the top 20. We were selling up to 60,000 copies a day. This is one of the few businesses where instant success brings beautiful women, and anything you want is like given to you and thrust upon you. He had all the trappings of Elvis success. The rock and roll cocktail entered his life at that period, which was champagne, cognac, and cocaine. That's when his creative output just came to, it leveled out and it started to decline.
I could have loved you, girl, like a planet. I could have chained your heart to a star.
It was just a magical time, the 70s. I met Mark in 1972 at the Beverly Hills Hotel. I had recorded the original Tainted Love. So I think Mark always knew the earlier Gloria Jones, but he never told me. Mark was looking for some singers singing in the background for his tour. But the first date was actually in Tampa, Florida. Mark asked, what did I want to eat? And I told him seafood, and so he ordered 129 boxes of seafood. And so the limousine just kept bringing all of these boxes. And, but it wasn't that he was showing off, like I can afford it, but that's what he wanted to give me. Mark was loving, honorable. I fell in love with Mark. He was the best lover. We went into a shop in Beverly Hills. He says, I really like that leopard jacket. And it was $2,000. So the lady, she rung the bill. And after we got back to the hotel, he says, wow, I didn't know it was gonna cost that much. He said, and you know what else? He said, I think it's a dress. I said, well, what do you think you're gonna do? So he went and he got a pair of scissors and he chopped it and he says, it's my jacket now. The fact that he came from a very humble background and he could afford it, he loved it, you know. He loved cars. He never really wanted to drive. He had a fear of driving. We rented a gold Cadillac. David Bowie called him. We drive down to David's place. Mark says, well, David and I are gonna go for a ride. And I said, well, who's driving? He said, David. Can you imagine these two rock stars with their gangster hats in this caddy driving down Sunset Boulevard? And it had to be wonderful to look over and you see Mark Bolan in the car, David Bowie. Mark was very intelligent. But inside, he was a little boy, very sensitive, being on stage, that's your moment of power, because either you're going to reach them or you're not. The business was changing, and the girls were growing up. They weren't quite the Latini boppers who had been with him. They were now becoming women, and you had a lot of competition. You're used to having #1 records, then all of a sudden, no sales. So what does that do to a person? I mean, you're only human. It was hard. It was hard. His records were not selling. Marc was very disillusioned. It drove him to almost insanity. Being a rock and roller, there's the booze. What actually helped him to come back was having the baby. I called the studio, and they had him to come to the phone. He says, whatever you do, do not have that baby until I arrive. He was there for me, and he held my hand, and he was there when Roland came into the world. He was dedicated and devoted.
All right. Welcome to a new show called Marc. Could be a lot of new sounds, a lot of new experiences.
1, 2, 3, yeah!
Marc had achieved everything that he wanted to do in life.
Swift is a kill, shadows.
He was able to take that hurt of not being the star that he was, but able to go and to create new ideas.
Life's an elevator, it goes up and down.
That your boy George, your Oasis, your music of today. Look at his music. It's still on TV, still on the radio.
Do you ever waking up in the middle of the night and think, in another 20 or 30 years, I'm going to be 50 or 60?
I don't think I live that long.
You don't?
No.
I was a bus driver at the time. About 6:45 in the morning, I got back into the town and there was a driver and he said, well, you've got some trouble at home.
The pop world is mourning the death of Marc Bolan, who was killed instantly when the car in which he was travelling hit a tree near his home in South London.
Just on the 7 o'clock news, it come across that Marc had been killed in a car crash.
I remember pulling up the blinds in my kitchen and my neighbour called over. She said, have you heard the news? I said, hold on, I'm going in, my phone's ringing. And of course it was my parents phoning me up to say what happened to Marc. And it was horrendous. I just couldn't believe God's taken him such an early age.
I remember going to the service in Golders Green. All the rock stars were there like they should have been. And this is going to choke me up because every time I think about it, it's terrible. The rabbi read a lovely eulogy. There's not a dry eye in the place. And his coffin is on this kind of track, and the doors of the cremation oven opened up. And at that moment, Marc's mother stands up and screams, "My baby."
I was dancing when I was 12. I was dancing when I was 12. I was dancing when I was out. I was dancing when I was out. I danced myself right out the womb. I danced myself right out the womb.
When I lost him, I stayed in shock for over 14 years. I could not release that he wasn't there. Sometimes spiritually, we don't understand that if we hold on, that person can remain in limbo. And I can remember finally he came to me in a vision and he said I had to go on and I had to let him go. But he's still in my heart, he's still with me, and he comes to me now as a butterfly. Having Roland keeps me closer to Marc, so Marc's legacy lives on.
Like even times out here in LA, I'd walk into somewhere and hear my dad's music. It was almost like I called up ahead and said, hey, I'll be there in 10 minutes, you know? Of course, I walk in and here's the song and everyone's, you know, like... I kind of wish I could say I had more memories, but I was so young when it happened. I was just about to celebrate my second birthday, which is September 26th. And my dad's 30th would have been September 30th, and he passed away on the 16th. There's definitely certain things that stay within your DNA. I've been in the music industry for quite a bit of time now, and I do feel a connection to my father when I sing the words, and especially with an audience that is embracing that. When you hit that last chord, it kind of feels like everything's kind of at peace.
Yiskadal v'yiskadash Shemei Rabbah.
On the anniversary of my dad's passing at Golders Green Crematorium in London, all the fans get together, pay homage to my father. Prayers are said, people speak their words.
And always remember to keep a little Marc in your heart.
Whenever I go back to the UK, I'm so lucky that I at least have a Feld family over there. It kind of filled up a hole inside of me, discovering exactly who my father was, and even to this day, we sit down, have a cup of tea, and talk, and a strong connection there.
It's nice to all be gathered together. We just reminisce about Marc. He'll always be in our mind.
Is the spirit still here?
If he's looking down on us, and I'm sure he is, he would love it.
Thanks, guys.
God bless his soul. God bless you, Marc.
God bless you.
God bless Marc. Bless Marc.
I absolutely idolised him. He meant the world to me. And I miss him. Really, every day I miss him.
He was a mensch, he really was. So I would just look into him and say, Marc, I love you, congratulations on your 70th birthday, and I would give him a very big hug.
Well, brings us to the end of another show. I hope you enjoyed it. Just remember, keep a little Marc in your heart and watch the same Marc time, same Marc channel.